Ambassador Catherine Moore had served humanity for 30 years across 12 star systems. She had faced hostile aliens, survived assassination attempts, and negotiated treaties that saved millions of lives. But nothing in her long career prepared her for the message that arrived at 3 a.m. aboard the diplomatic vessel Endurance. The Galactic Council, a governing body of 47 species that had existed for over 10,000 years, had summoned Earth's representative for an emergency session. The message contained no explanation, no agenda, no hints about what humanity had done wrong. Just a cold demand for immediate presence at Nexus Prime, the ancient station where the Council held its sessions. Catherine sat in her quarters, reading the message for the 5th time. Her hands were steady, but her heart was racing. Emergency sessions were rare. In the past century, they had only been called 3 times, and each time, a species had faced severe punishment. Her aide, Lieutenant Daniel Perry, knocked on her door and entered without waiting for a response. The young officer's face was pale, and his eyes were wide with barely controlled fear. He handed her a datapad and waited while she read it. "We intercepted this from the Velothian delegation," he said quietly. "They're calling it the Trial of Soul." Catherine felt her stomach drop. The Velothians were one of the oldest species in the galaxy. They were cold, calculating, and they had never forgiven humanity for expanding into territories they considered their own. A trial meant accusations. And accusations from the Council could mean only one thing for a young species like humanity: extinction. The journey to Nexus Prime took for standard days. Catherine spent every waking hour in her office, reviewing every treaty humanity had signed, every agreement they had made, every interaction with alien species in the past decade. She searched desperately for any violation that might explain the summons. She found nothing concrete. But the silence from Earth's allies was more frightening than any. Accusation. The Kreth had been humanity's trading partners for generations. Their ships carried human goods across the galaxy. Their technology had helped Earth build its first faster-than-light engines. But when Catherine sent them a message asking for information, they did not respond. She tried again and again. But the Kreth remained silent. The Minari had sent their children to Earth universities for decades. Human teachers had trained Minari scientists who now worked on projects across the galaxy. Catherine had attended the graduation of the Minari ambassador's daughter just 2 years ago. But when she reached out to the Minari delegation, she received only a formal acknowledgement that the Endurance had been granted permission to pass through their space. "Nothing more," "We're afraid," Daniel said on the 3rd day. "Everyone is afraid to be associated with us." Catherine nodded slowly. Whatever humanity was accused of, it was serious enough to make their closest friends pretend they didn't know them. When the Endurance finally docked at Nexus Station, Catherine put on her formal diplomatic uniform. The deep blue fabric represented Earth's oceans, and the silver stars on her shoulders represented humanity's colonies spread across 100 worlds. If this was to be humanity's end, she would face it with dignity. She expected to be met by the usual diplomatic escort, polite officials who would guide her to comfortable quarters and offer refreshments, while she waited for the session to begin. Instead, she found a squad of armed sentinels waiting at the airlock. The sentinels were the Council's peacekeepers, soldiers drawn from a dozen species and trained to enforce the will of the galaxy's governing body. They wore black armor that absorbed light, and they carried weapons that could vaporize a human being in an instant. They said nothing as they surrounded Catherine and began walking her through the station's corridors. Nexus Station was ancient beyond human understanding. The corridors were carved from material that no species could identify, and the walls were covered with murals, depicting the rise and fall of civilizations that had been dust before Earth's sun had formed. Catherine had walked these halls many times before, but today they felt different. Today they felt like the path to an execution chamber. The council chamber was a vast dome of crystalline architecture. Thousands of seats rose in tiers around a central platform, each section designated for a different species. As Catherine entered, she saw that almost every seat was filled. 46 delegations watched in silence as she was led to the accused pedestal, a raised platform in the center of the chamber. She would stand alone before the judgment of the galaxy. High Arbiter Vorn presided over the council. He was a Calesian, a member of the species that had founded the council millennia ago when humanity's ancestors were still living in caves. His body was tall and thin, with four-jointed arms that moved in ways human eyes found difficult to follow. His face was composed of shifting plates that could express emotions no human could read. His eyes were black as deep space, and they fixed upon Catherine with an intensity that made her want to look away. She forced herself to meet his gaze. Ambassador Catherine Moore of Earthvorn said, his voice echoing through translators embedded in every seat, "You have been summoned to answer for crimes committed by your species. You will have 40 cycles to prepare your defense." 40 cycles. Catherine did the math quickly. Less than 3 Earth weeks to prepare for whatever accusation was coming. The penalty, Vorn continued, should you be found guilty, is the erasure protocol. The chamber stirred. Even species who had pushed for this trial seemed uncomfortable at the mention of erasure. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. She had read about the erasure protocol in history files, but she had never imagined she would hear it mentioned in relation to her own species. Erasure meant the complete sterilization of a species' homeworld. Every city destroyed, every forest burned, every ocean boiled away, and then the same treatment applied to every colony, every outpost, every place where that species had ever lived. It had been used only twice in the Council's 10,000-year history, and both times the targeted species had been utterly destroyed. Not even ruins remained. "What are the charges?" Catherine asked. Her voice was steady, only because she had spent 30 years learning to hide her fear. Vorn's black eyes showed nothing. "You will be informed when the trial commences. Until then, you are confined to your vessel. Any attempt to leave Nexus Station will be treated as an admission of guilt, and the erasure protocol will be executed immediately." The sentinels stepped forward, ready to escort her back to the Endurance. Catherine wanted to scream, to demand answers, to fight against the injustice of being condemned without even knowing her crime. But she was a diplomat. She understood that showing weakness here would only make things worse as she turned to leave. She caught a glimpse of Ambassador Thiessen, the Velothian representative. His serpentine body was coiled in his species seat, and his scales shimmered with colors that Catherine had learned to recognize over years of dealing with his kind. He was showing triumph, but beneath the triumph, she saw something else, something that didn't make sense. Fear. The Velothians were afraid, and that terrified Catherine more than anything else. Because if the species that had orchestrated this trial was afraid, then something far worse than human extinction was at stake. She had 40 cycles to find out what. The trial began on what would have been a Monday morning on Earth, though such measurements meant nothing in the artificial environment of Nexus Station. Catherine had forced herself to sleep according to Earth time, clinging to that small connection to home. She had eaten breakfast even though she had no appetite. She had reviewed her notes even though she still did not know what crime humanity was accused of committing. When she entered the council chamber, she found it even more crowded than before. Species who rarely attended sessions had sent representatives. The insectoid Chitterax occupied an entire section with their clicking, buzzing bodies. The Velmori floated in their containment spheres, beings made of gas who communicated through patterns of light. Even the Granite Lords had come. Massive, silicon-based creatures who rarely left their homeworld and never involved themselves in galactic politics. Everyone wanted to witness the trial of humanity. Catherine took her place on the accused pedestal and waited. High Arbiter Vorn called the session to order with a gesture of his four-jointed arm, and the chamber fell silent. Then he yielded the floor to the Velothian delegation. Ambassador Thiessen glided forward on his serpentine lower body. His scales shimmered with colors that indicated triumph and satisfaction. His eyes, cold and reptilian, fixed upon Catherine with obvious hatred. 3 cycles ago, Thiessen began. His voice smooth and confident, a human vessel entered the forbidden zone of Kethvalor. A murmur ran through the chamber. Catherine kept her face neutral, but inside her mind was racing. She had heard of Kethvalor. It was a region of space that was marked on every star chart as absolutely forbidden. No species was allowed to enter without unanimous approval from the Council. and such approval had never been granted in recorded history. This region is sacred to 12 founding species, Thiessen continued. It has been protected by the Pax Galactica for 8,000 years. The penalty for unauthorized entry is clearly stated in our most ancient laws. He paused for effect, letting the chamber wait for his next words. The human vessel not only entered the forbidden zone, it descended to the surface of the third world. And there, humans disturbed the sleepers. The chamber erupted. Species who had been silent before now shouted accusations and demands. The Chitteraks clicked their mandibles so loudly that the translators struggled to keep up. The Velmori flashed patterns of pure white, indicating extreme distress. Even the Granite Lords, who moved so slowly that most species considered them barely alive, began to glow with internal heat. Catherine did not understand the significance of what Thiessen had said, but the reaction told her everything she needed to know. Whatever the sleepers were, disturbing them was the worst crime imaginable. "What are the sleepers?" she asked, breaking protocol but needing to understand. Vorn answered. And for the first time, his voice carried something that sounded like emotion. "The progenitors. The species that seeded life throughout this galaxy billions of years ago. They created us all, Ambassador Moore. Every species in this chamber exists because the progenitors designed the building blocks of life and spread them across the stars. When their work was complete, they entered their final rest on Keth Valor 3. They left instructions that they were never to be disturbed until the heat death of the universe." The chamber had grown quiet again. Catherine felt the weight of what she was being told pressing down on her. Humanity was accused of disturbing beings that every species in the galaxy considered gods. "Your species has committed the gravest sacrilege imaginable," Thiessen said. "The punishment must be absolute." "I need to contact Earth," Catherine said. "I need to understand what happened. I need to speak with the crew of the vessel you mentioned." "Communication with your homeworld has been severed," Thiessen replied, and there was satisfaction in his voice. "Standard protocol during erasure proceedings. You will defend your species with the evidence available to you, or you will not defend them at all." Catherine stood alone on the pedestal, 46 species looking down at her, and felt the weight of 8 billion lives pressing against her shoulders. Everyone on Earth, everyone on the colonies, everyone who had ever called themselves human was depending on her to find a way out of this. She remembered a law she had studied decades ago. When she was a young diplomat, just learning the rules of the galaxy, it was an ancient provision rarely used, but never repealed. "I invoke the right of investigation," she declared. "Under Section 447 of the Pax Galactica, the accused may examine all evidence before rendering defense. This right cannot be denied." The chamber stirred. The San's scales flickered with colors that suggested anger and uncertainty. He had not expected her to know about this law. Vorn considered her words for a long moment. His black eyes revealed nothing, but his four-jointed arms moved in patterns that Catherine could not interpret. "The right of investigation is granted," he said finally. "You have 10 cycles to examine the evidence. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Perry may accompany you as your sole permitted assistant. Any attempt to flee Nexus Station will result in immediate execution of the erasure protocol. 10 cycles. 10 days to save humanity." As Catherine left the chamber, surrounded by sentinels who watched her every move, she tried to process what she had learned. A human ship had entered forbidden space. Human feet had walked on sacred ground. Human actions had disturbed beings that the galaxy considered divine, but something did not fit. The Velothians had pushed for this trial. They had orchestrated the charges. They had cut off humanity's communication with Earth. And yet, when Catherine had looked at Thiessen during the first session, she had seen fear beneath his triumph. Why would the Velothians be afraid if they had already won? The answer came to her as she walked through the ancient corridors of Nexus Station. The Velothians were not afraid of humanity. They were afraid of something else. Something connected to the Forbidden Zone. Something connected to the Sleepers. They were afraid of what humanity might discover during the investigation. Catherine quickened her pace. She had 10 cycles to find the truth, and she had a feeling that the truth was far more dangerous than anything the Council had told her. When she reached the Endurance, Daniel was waiting for her with datapads and sensor logs and everything they would need to begin their investigation. His face was pale, but his eyes were determined. "Where do we start?" he asked. Catherine took a deep breath. "We start by finding out what really happened on Kethvalor. 3. And we don't stop until we know everything. The fate of humanity depended on what they found. The evidence package arrived aboard the Endurance within hours of Catherine's return from the council chamber. It contained thousands of files, sensor logs, testimonies, and recordings. The council had provided everything they claimed to have about the incident at Kethvalor. Catherine and Daniel began working through it immediately, and they did not stop for 3 days. They ate at their desks. They slept in shifts of no more than 2 hours. They drank coffee until their hands shook and their eyes burned. But slowly, piece by piece, they began to understand what had really happened in the Forbidden Zone. The vessel that had entered Kethvalor was called the Maiden's Hope. It was a civilian cargo ship, not a military vessel. It carried agricultural equipment to the frontier colonies, the same route it had traveled dozens of times before. The captain was a man named Samuel Drake, a veteran spacer with a clean record and no history of violating regulations. According to the navigation logs, the Maiden's Hope had experienced a catastrophic drive failure during a routine jump. The ship's faster-than-light engine had malfunctioned, throwing the vessel off course by 17 light years. When the crew regained control, they found themselves in the Forbidden Zone, with no power to escape and no way to call for help. "It was an accident," Daniel said, rubbing his exhausted eyes. "They couldn't have avoided it. Their engine literally exploded and dropped them in the worst possible place in the galaxy. Keep reading." Catherine replied. The emergency landing on Kethvalor. 3 was where things became complicated. The Maiden's Hope had not crashed. The ship's systems showed a controlled descent, with engines firing in careful sequence and landing gear deployed properly. Captain Drake had brought his vessel down with the skill of a pilot who knew exactly what he was doing. And then, for 6 hours, the ship's external cameras recorded Drake and his crew of 5 walking among structures that defied description. Catherine watched the recordings in silence. The structures were ancient beyond comprehension, made of materials that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Towers rose into a purple sky, connected by bridges that appeared to be made of solidified light. Doorways stood open, leading into darkness that the cameras could not penetrate. And everywhere, covering every surface, were symbols that seemed to move when Catherine tried to focus on them. The crew had not simply survived their crash landing. They had gone exploring. They knew where they were, Daniel whispered. They knew this was forbidden space, and they walked into those structures anyway. Catherine nodded slowly. This was bad. This was very bad. An accidental crash was one thing. Deliberately entering sacred structures was something else entirely. But then she found the final recording. And everything changed. Captain Drake stood before a massive doorway covered in shifting symbols. His environmental suit was dusty, and his face showed exhaustion and something else. Fear. Real, genuine fear. "The Velothians were here," Drake said into his helmet recorder. 3 days ago, based on the decay of their boot prints, their environmental suits leave a distinctive pattern. They entered this structure, spent hours inside, and then they left. Whatever they took, we need to document the evidence before we leave. This isn't just about us anymore. Something is very wrong here. Catherine played the recording again. And again. And again, the Velothians had been there first. They had entered the sacred site before the Maiden's Hope had even experienced its engine failure. They had spent hours inside the progenitor structures. And they had taken something. "They're framing us," Daniel said, his voice shaking with anger. "The Velothians committed the violation, and they're using us to cover it up. They probably sabotaged the Maiden's Hope deliberately, made sure the crew would land exactly where they needed them to land." Catherine leaned back in her chair. Her mind was racing, but for the first time since the trial began, she felt something like hope. They had evidence. They had proof. They could fight back, but there was still a question she could not answer. Why? What had the Velothians taken from the Forbidden Zone that was worth risking a war with humanity? What was so important that they would commit the very crime they were accusing humans of committing? The answer came on the 6th day of their investigation. A message arrived through a channel that should not have existed. It was encrypted in a code that only Earth's intelligence services knew, code that had never been shared with any alien species. The message came from the Kreth, their longtime allies who had refused to answer hails since the trial began. Catherine read the message 3 times before she fully understood what it meant. Velothians took a progenitor weapon from the third world of Kethveller. This weapon is capable of sterilizing entire star systems. Based on our intelligence, they plan to use it against Earth's colonies in the Perseus Arm within 12 cycles. When humanity responds with military force, the Velothians will present your retaliation as unprovoked aggression. The Council will authorize erasure not for the Kethvalar violation, but for starting an interstellar war. You must expose them before it is too late. Daniel read the message over Catherine's shoulder. His face had gone white. They're not just framing us for a crime, he said slowly. They're going to destroy our colonies, blame us for fighting back, and then use the Council to finish us off. They've been planning this for years, maybe decades. Catherine nodded. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. The Velothians had found a weapon capable of destroying stars, and they were going to use it to wipe humanity from the galaxy. The trial, the accusations, the erasure protocol, all of it was just theater. The real attack was coming, and unless Catherine found a way to stop it, billions of humans would die. She had 5 cycles left before the trial resumed. 5 days to expose a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of galactic government. 5 days to save her species from extinction. We need more evidence, she said. We need to prove that the Velothians were in the Forbidden Zone before we were, and we need to find out who helped them. Daniel nodded. Where do we start? Catherine looked at the ancient walls of Nexus Station, walls that had been built by the Calassians thousands of years ago. The Calassians had created the Council. They had written the Pax Galactica. They had installed monitoring systems throughout the galaxy to ensure that their laws were followed, including, she suspected, the Forbidden Zone. We start, she said, by finding out what the Calassians have been watching all these years. And we pray that they haven't erased the evidence. The clock was ticking. Humanity's survival depended on what Catherine found next. The council chamber was silent as Catherine Moore took her place on the accused pedestal for what everyone expected to be the final session. She had spent her remaining cycles gathering every piece of evidence, analyzing every recording, and reaching out through back channels to every species that had ever traded with humanity, ever sent their children to Earth schools, ever benefited from human innovation and friendship. The Kreth delegation had arrived despite the communication blackout, their crystalline forms catching the light as they took their seats. The Minari were there, their soft fur bristling with nervous energy. The Thalassians had come, and the Vendari, and a dozen other species who had maintained quiet relationships with humanity over the centuries. They were not allies, exactly. The political situation was too dangerous for any species to openly support humanity against the Velothians. But they were witnesses. Their presence gave Catherine hope that the truth might actually matter today. High Arbiter Vorn called the session to order, his black eyes fixed upon Catherine with an intensity that she could not read. His 4-jointed arms were still, a posture that indicated careful attention. Ambassador Moore, he said, you may present your defense. Catherine took a deep breath. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind, but now that it was here, she felt strangely calm. Either the evidence would speak for itself, or humanity would die. There was nothing more she could do except tell the truth. Its honored council members. She began. I will not dispute that a human vessel entered the Forbidden Zone. I will not dispute that human feet walked on sacred ground. Captain Samuel Drake and his crew did land on Kethvalar 3, and they did enter the progenitor structures. These facts are not in question. The chamber stirred. Some species seemed surprised that she was admitting the charges so openly. Ambassador Theson's scales flickered with colors that suggested confusion and suspicion. What I will dispute, Catherine continued, is the narrative you have been told. I will demonstrate that humanity is not the true violator here, and I will prove that this trial is nothing more than a cover for a crime far worse than anything humanity has been accused of. She activated her datapad and projected the first recording onto the chamber's central display. The image showed boot prints in ancient dust, preserved in the airless environment of HFY 3. The tread pattern was distinctive, clearly different from human designs. These prints were found by Captain Drake's crew, approximately 100 meters from their landing site. The pattern matches Velothian environmental suits. Based on the decay rate of the dust disturbance, these prints were made 3 days before the Maiden's Hope arrived. The chamber erupted with murmuring. Several delegations leaned forward in their seats. Ambassador Thiessen rose from his position, his scales flashing with angry colors. "These recordings are fabricated," he declared. "Human deception knows no limits. Everyone knows that humans are capable of manipulating digital evidence." Catherine remained calm. "The recordings come from Captain Drake's ship, but the sensor signatures are not human. They are Calician." She turned to face High Arbiter Vorn directly. "Your ancestors installed monitoring systems throughout the Forbidden Zone thousands of years ago. These systems were designed to record any unauthorized entry into sacred space. The Velothians believed these systems were inactive. They were wrong." Vorn's four-jointed arms twitched slightly, the first sign of emotion Catherine had seen from him. "How did you access these systems?" "Through legitimate investigative protocols," Catherine replied. Section 447 of the Pax Galactica grants the accused access to all evidence relevant to their defense. The Calician monitoring systems contain evidence that is extremely relevant. She paused, letting the implications sink in. "Would you like to see what they recorded?" The chamber fell completely silent. Vorn considered for a long moment, then gestured for her to continue. The next projection showed a Velothian vessel descending through the purple atmosphere of HFY 3. The image was grainy but unmistakable. The ship landed near the same structures that Captain Drake would later explore. A crew emerged, wearing the distinctive environmental suits of the Velothian military. For 14 hours, the recording showed Velothians entering and exiting the progenitor structures. They moved with purpose, clearly searching for something specific. And when they finally left, they carried a container of black metal that seemed to absorb light. The container's surface was covered in the same shifting symbols as the ancient doorways. "This is a progenitor weapon," Catherine said, her voice steady and clear. "According to my sources, it is capable of sterilizing entire star systems. The Velothians removed it from sacred ground 3 days before the Maiden's Hope experienced its convenient engine failure. They took a weapon of mass destruction from the Forbidden Zone, and then they arranged for a human ship to crash in the same location so that we would be blamed for the violation." Thiessen was screaming now, his scales flashing every color of rage his species could produce. "Lies, fabrications. This is a human conspiracy to deflect from their own crimes." But Catherine was not finished. "Have received intelligence from multiple sources indicating that the Velothians plan to use this weapon against human colonies in the Perseus Arm. When we respond with military force to defend our people, they will present our actions as unprovoked aggression. They will claim that humanity started an interstellar war, and they will ask this council to authorize erasure, not for the HFY violation, but for threatening galactic peace." The chamber was chaos. Some delegations were shouting accusations at the Velothians. Others were demanding verification of the evidence. The Sentinels were moving to maintain order, but they seemed uncertain about which side they should be protecting. Through it all, Catherine stood perfectly still, waiting. Vorn restored silence with a gesture that dimmed the lights throughout the entire chamber. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but every word carried to every seat. "Ambassador Thiessen, is this recording accurate?" Thiessen's scales had lost all color. His serpentine body was coiled tight, ready to strike or flee. His eyes darted around the chamber, looking for allies, finding none. His silence was answer enough. The Velothian delegation is hereby placed under arrest, Vorn declared. They will be confined to quarters pending full investigation. All Velothian vessels within Council space are ordered to stand down. Any resistance will be met with force. Sentinels moved toward the Velothian section. Thiessen hissed something in his native language that the translators did not render, but his meaning was clear enough. He had lost. The charges against humanity are suspended, Vorn continued. Ambassador Moore, you have served your species with distinction. The Council owes you an apology. Catherine nodded, accepting the words. But she did not leave the pedestal. High Arbiter, she said, with respect, I am not finished. The chamber fell silent once more. Every eye, every sensor, every attention turned to the human woman standing alone on the accused platform. There is more to say, Catherine said, and humanity intends to say it. Vorn considered her for a long moment. Then he gestured for her to continue. Catherine looked out at the assembled representatives of 46 species. She thought of Earth. She thought of the colonies. She thought of Captain Drake and his crew, who had risked their lives to document the truth, and she prepared to change the galaxy forever. Catherine Moore looked out at the assembled representatives of 46 species. These were beings who had watched humanity grow from a primitive species on a small blue planet to a civilization spanning 100 worlds. They had traded with humans, studied with humans, and occasionally fought against humans. But through it all, they had never truly respected humanity. To them, humans were children playing among the stars. Newcomers who had risen too fast and spread too far. That was about to change. For 3 centuries, Catherine began, her voice calm and clear. Humanity has sought peaceful integration into the galactic community. We have traded fairly, honoring every agreement we have made. We have respected the laws of the Pax Galactica, even when those laws worked against our interests. We have accepted our place as newcomers among ancient civilizations, asking only for the chance to prove ourselves worthy of membership in this great council. She paused, letting her words settle over the chamber. In return, we have been insulted. We have been cheated. We have been confined to marginal territories that no other species wanted. We have been treated as lesser beings, as if our youth somehow made us inferior. And still, we sought peace. We believed that patience would eventually earn us the respect we deserved. Several delegations shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Chitteraks clicked their mandibles softly. The Minari looked down at their hands. Even the Granite Lords seemed to glow slightly brighter. The Velothians did not act alone. Catherine's words fell like stones into still water. The chamber went absolutely silent. It could not have entered the Forbidden Zone without inside assistance. Someone on this council provided them with the access codes for the collation monitoring systems. Someone helped them disable the alarms that should have alerted the galaxy to their crime. Someone told them where to find the weapon they stole. She turned slowly, looking at each section of the chamber in turn. They could not have blocked our communications with Earth without technology they do not possess. Velothian jamming systems are primitive compared to what was used against us. Someone provided them with advanced equipment that only a handful of species in this galaxy could manufacture. The Velmori began flashing patterns of distress. The Thalassians refused to meet Catherine's eyes, and they could not have planned the systematic destruction of our colonies without knowing that someone on this council would look the other way, without knowing that when they used a weapon of mass destruction against human worlds, their actions would be ignored or explained away. Catherine straightened her shoulders and continued, I do not know how many species were complicit in this plot. I do not know how deep the conspiracy runs. I do not know who sat in comfortable seats and planned the deaths of billions of human beings. But I know this. The galaxy that tolerated such plotting is not a galaxy where humanity can survive through peace alone. The words hung in the air. No one spoke. No one moved. Humanity formally withdraws from the Pax Galactica. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted in a dozen languages. Translators struggled to keep up with the overlapping voices. High Arbiter Vorn called for order, his 4-jointed arms moving in patterns of command. But for the first time in Catherine's memory, the council ignored him. She waited patiently for the noise to subside. When it finally did, She continued as if nothing had happened. We will recover the progenitor weapon. We will ensure it can never be used against any species, human or otherwise. The Velothians stole something that belongs to the entire galaxy, and we will return it to its rightful place. Her voice hardened slightly. We will identify every member of the conspiracy against us. Every species that helped plan our destruction. Every official who looked the other way. Every hand that reached for the knife meant for our backs. And we will hold them accountable. She looked directly at the recording devices that would broadcast her words to 1 trillion beings across 1,000 worlds. To any species that stands in our way, I have a simple message. You sought to destroy us in darkness, through lies and treachery and cowardice. You thought that because we were young, we were weak. You thought that because we preferred peace, we could not make war. You were wrong, Catherine Moore, Ambassador of Earth. Representative of 8 billion humans and their children scattered across the stars. Spoke the words that would echo through history. When we come for you, it will be in the light. You will see our ships in your skies. You will hear our voices on your communications. You will know exactly who we are and exactly why we have come. There will be no shadows for you to hide in. There will be no lies to protect you. There will only be justice. The chamber was utterly silent now. Even the species who had been shouting moments before sat motionless. Watching the human woman with something that might have been fear, Catherine softened her voice slightly, though her eyes remained hard. To those species who have dealt with us honorably, we extend our hand in continued friendship. The Kreth, who risked their standing to share intelligence with us. The Minari, who refused to abandon students and partners, despite the pressure they faced. The Thalassians, the Vendari, and others who maintained their relationships with humanity even when doing so was dangerous. She nodded toward their sections of the chamber. You have earned humanity's eternal gratitude. We will remember our friends, just as we will remember our enemies. The bonds we have built will endure, and together. We will create a galaxy where species are judged by their actions rather than their age. Catherine turned finally to High Arbiter Vorn. The ancient Calician watched her with his black eyes, unreadable as always. But his 4-jointed arms had stopped moving. He was paying attention. High Arbiter, humanity does not seek war. We have never sought war. We came to the stars hoping to find friends and allies and partners in the great work of building civilization. We still hope for these things. She paused. But if war is what is required to secure our survival, then war is what we will bring. If this council chooses to stand against us, if you decide that human lives are worth less than political convenience, if you would rather protect conspirators than justice, then you will learn what humanity is truly capable of. Catherine descended from the pedestal. Her footsteps echoed in the silent chamber as she walked toward the exit. Every eye followed her. Every species that had ever underestimated humanity watched as she passed. At the doorway, she stopped and turned back one final time. The choice belongs to this council. You can stand with us, and together we will build something better than what came before. Or you can stand against us, and you will discover why humans have survived everything the universe has thrown at us for 300,000 years. Her final words were quiet, but they carried to every corner of the vast chamber. Choose wisely. Ambassador Catherine Moore walked out of the council chamber and did not look back. Behind her, 46 species sat in stunned silence, grappling with a reality they had never imagined. Humanity, the upstart species, the children of Earth who had seemed so easy to dismiss, had just declared that the th of their submission was over. The galaxy would never be the same. In the days and weeks that followed, as word of Catherine's speech spread across the stars, species would remember where they were when they heard it. They would remember the fear they felt, the respect they suddenly found for the humans they had underestimated, and the dawning realization that the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted forever. Humanity was no longer asking for a place at the table. They were building their own table, and everyone else would have to decide which side they wanted to sit on.